evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Umtungo yengo imali ngundima kankumbuzo. Umasikana imfengu uthando lwethu kwadlanga uyanibulisa ngalenhlwa yangomhla we-12 kule nyanga kaMarch 2023. Welcome once again to Bond the Politique, our educational platform that tends to discuss and get into conversations with various topics that relate to the politics of South Africa, the continent, and the world. And you might have noticed over the past few days and few weeks that my voice have not been well. Even today it is not. But we are soldiering on, because every Sunday, 6 o'clock, we had made a commitment to be with you guys and have some various conversations around political issues. One of the things that is going to keep me going and moving in this conversation is this cup of warm water, which I will then at times utilize as a way of removing the irritation in my throat. That as it may, once again, we know that you have been following us, you have been with us. These are the details. On YouTube, remember to subscribe, Bond the Politique. We are also live every Sunday at 6 o'clock on Twitter. If you go to Twitter, you will find us there, and also you will also find my personal Twitter handle on Twitter at OTGuy1. We are constantly available there. And Bond the Politique is actually available also on TikTok, on Instagram, and excuse me, and on Facebook. I'm sorry for that irritation. I know it surely might be coming a little bit unprofessional on your side. We are also available on Facebook. Please make sure that you don't only follow us on Facebook and these other platforms. YouTube requires a large number of people to take part in it. One of the things that I had said the other time and the other day was trying to explain the idea around the name of the word. I mean, of the name of the program, Bond the Politique. It's a French name. Now, when you tend to go on Facebook, on YouTube, and you try and pick it up, you will constantly find that it is located within the algorithms of the French-speaking political discussions and conversations. But for those who are not aware of it, the name Bond the Politique means a bridge to politics. When we looked and came out with this idea was that we thought sometimes there are people who are really would want to be interested in understanding the politics of the day. But at times, people get to be so frustrated by the level of hidden jargon, the lack of clarity, and also the superficial analysis or the superficial production of information, especially on issues of politics, because politics tends to be made to be a province of a certain people, when actually politics is affecting all of us. So if you look at us there on YouTube, you will constantly find us within the algorithms that are French speaking. Now, I don't know how. Maybe you can suggest it in one way or the other. I would love to hear from you about that. You can explain to us, how do we make sure that we bridge these two worlds, the English world, which is our colonial masters, with the French world, which have colonized most of the West African territories. So that is the understanding. Now, it is a bridge to politics. It's like when somebody taking steps into understanding politics and the politics of the day. Now that is out of the way, today we are going to have our guest, Ms. Zandiswa Kula. Ms. Zandiswa Kula is known in the political spaces. She is Secretary Provincial Secretary of the PAC in Gauteng. But today we are going to be having a conversation with her on various topics that relate from the International Women's Day, which was held on the 8th of March. And also we're going to talk about other domestic political issues, like there was a reshuffling of the cabinet in South Africa a few days ago. We're going to talk about the envisaged national shutdown, which is planned for the 20th of March 2023 in South Africa. We're also going to talk about women leadership in political environments and women leadership in general. But before we can do that, because we know most South Africa is living in a world of blackouts. So our guest has not yet come through for the conversation. We'll wait for a few minutes to ensure that she does come through. But for the time being, I would like us to. I'm not going to engage on all of these topics. I'm just going to put them up, so that when she begins to come through, and then you viewers want to make some comments and questions to her, it would be easy for you to understand where do we come from with these elements. Unfortunately, the United Nations has presented the day, the International Women's Day, as a global day celebrating the social, economic, and cultural, including the political achievements of women. In the United Nations website, there is an International Women's Day, the 2023 theme there. It is presented as it is embracing equity. The theme of 2023, it seeks to embrace equity. So one of the things that the International Women's Day website tends to speak about, and it says it provides an important opportunity for teachers, parents, and caregivers to educate and inspire children and students about gender equality. It emanates from celebrating women's achievements to challenging gender stereotypes and biases, and further educate future generations about the gender equality, that it is one of the most grassroots differences anyone can make. There are many useful classroom resources that are used by the United Nations International Women's Day platform to ensure that these things are succeeding. But one of the objectives that they have is that there should be an access to important and informative resources to support, understand, challenge the stereotypes and biases to build self-confidence. I know that there are some people who have a different view and a totally different understanding. I know that the people who came up with this, and I know that Zandiswa, our guest, is going to be talking about this, the foundations of the International Women's Day, and this is one of the points that we want here to talk about. And from these foundations of the International Women's Day, it will provide us with an opportunity to then begin to discuss and have a conversation about the issues that relate to reshuffling in South Africa, the women leadership in political organizations. And one of the things that we have seen over the past few months is the challenging of Advocate Mukhwebane in the inquiry that is taking place in the South African Parliament. And we want to bring all these dimensions of women, and based on the International Women's Day that was held on the 8th. It is important because the foundations of the day itself, they might be now have been liberalized. That's how I read it. The International Women's Day has been liberalized, which is understandable because of the global hegemonic view of how politics must be run in the fall of the communist bloc. So the idea of the foundation of International Women's Day has been liberalized, like most of the things, like politics, like education, family, and all of those things. But we would want to go into the roots of the day itself and then be able to bring it back and see whether the foundational elements of the International Women's Day were able to, or did they achieve what they sought to achieve in relation to women. And beyond now this, you would have also seen that I made an example. I made mention of the reshuffling in South Africa, the South African cabinet. There was a reshuffling that took place. The president of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, after so many days, after so many months about the issue of reshuffling, he finally came through and he gave us what a new reshuffling. But then there was two old women that were, I'm saying old deliberately, né? So I'm not mistaken. I'm saying old deliberately. I think it was last year, two of these women continued to challenge Cyril Ramaphosa. And I know that Zandiswa has got a view on this particular issue, hence she will speak on it as well. Ms. Lindiwe Sisulu, the former Minister of Tourism, penned opinion piece where she was raising issues relating to the idea of the democratic South Africa and its underpinnings, where she was pointing that the society with which we live in is untransformed, it's problematic, and all that. So, and at a later stage, she was then removed for one reason or the other. Some people are therefore saying, factionally speaking, she had to be removed because she's not on the side of the president, but secondly, she's not performing her duties well. She is a woman also in that reshuffling. Now, that argument where people contest the person who is in the helm, in the case of Cyril Ramaphosa. I know the other arguments, you can bring them up if you want to bring them up, but I'm bringing this one specifically because for me it's more rooted and it's fundamental. When Lindiwe Sisulu contested these elements, including the issue of Phala when it came to Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, I know that she's a 74-year-old minister that has been redeployed into the Ministry of Youth, Women and People with Disabilities. Now, I'm saying she's moved now from the office of corporate governance, which was also a very strong portfolio. Then she's moved into the presidency, where she's going to be under the wing of the president. One person can therefore say, probably the president wants to clip her wings because she was one of the people who voted against the caucus. There was a view that was being given in Parliament of South Africa, but then there was a caucus view, and she did not toe that line of the caucus. So that also, I'm raising these not necessarily because I want them as the epitome of women leadership, but I'm just putting them across. Again, you've got a person in the name of Mrs. Mkhwebane. All these elements can never move away from the fact that there has been a factional battles that were taking place in the SA, in the SAC, in the ANC, and those are some of the elements. And thanks for that. Ulonwabo Dinge is saying that he finds the argument of associating her removal from factionalism as very much problematic, and I know it could be that. I agree with it. For some people, it could not necessarily be on a factional basis, but on performance. But I'm also saying that it could be that also on a factional basis because there has been these contestations of factions within the political organizations across the country. So I want us to engage on these different elements. Our guest is available now, and I would like to bring her into the studio, and she must put on her only her video so that we can be able to see her, and then we can start with our conversation. Molweni, siyabulisa ninjani?
Hi, Tando, and hi to your audience today. It's a pleasure to be here today and for us to have this conversation, right?
Well,
Apologies on my end because of load shedding. We all know the story, right? On it's either devices are not working or the internet is not strong enough, and so on. But apologies on my end for that, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
no, thank you. You're welcome, and I'm sure our people would appreciate that and that issue of blackouts and load shedding. As you might have heard, Zandiswa, that I was already moving with some of the outlines of these other things. But you know that what we were saying we're going to be having a conversation on, first and foremost, is the issue of International Women's Day, which was scheduled for the 8th of, or it was adopted as the 8th of March. And again, this year, with no difference, there was that case of the International Women's Day. Take our viewers in your understanding of the day itself, its founding, and also how you perceive it today, and then we can get into the other conversations as we move along. Mr. Lonabo Dinge, I'm holding on to your comment, and I hope that you are going to come back when we get into the points of the women leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Tando, for that introduction, though I missed parts of your introduction for today. So basically, what happened with International Women's Day is that for a very long time, women had consciously been aware, right, of the status in relation to that of the male counterparts, if you could put it like that. And you would see that in the 1880s, women now started being very uncomfortable with that in your Western, right, society. That's the context that I'm talking within. So what happens is that women start organizing, and they start establishing unions for reasons of organizing women, right, to rally under the core or for equal rights, for the right to vote, for the right to recognition, and for them to also participate within society. This is how it all starts. Now, as men go into World War One, right? So World War One happens. Then after that, there are no people or no tools, right, to participate, right, for reasons of production. So what happens is that now women are brought onto the table, right? So they now are working in your factories. They are the people that are basically the tools of production at that particular time. But what happens is that women become aware of the fact that they're not paid as much as men are paid at that particular time. And also, for a very long time, males were the keepers, right, of the establishment. They created the rules, and they made laws on behalf of women, right? Even in issues pertaining women, right? So you would find that the world, obviously, as it is right now, it was run by men, and the establishment in all its forms was patriarchal. So women then start saying and rebelling against the system, saying that no, we do not necessarily want male watchers, right? And there are no male watchers, anyways. And even when there aren't any, who they are all at war, right? And we are the people that are left behind. There is no form of recognition for us here. So time goes on, women go to the streets, they protest, and finally they get the right to vote, right? To participate in your voting processes. Now, many people can say that, well, the vote does make a difference in the sense that I do participate. I have the free will to decide and choose whoever it is that will lead, right, in this particular society. And also at the very same time, I also choose in terms of participatory processes, right? But then the problem is that very much so people somewhat think that because I am able to practice my right to vote and identify a particular leader, therefore, at least things are much better. And we see that on a daily basis, actually, here in South Africa, that, well, simply just because I'm able to vote does not necessarily mean that it very much changes in terms of my day to day existence. And the question of women even becomes worse, right? In the sense that we are still human beings that are relegated in a society that is led by men, right? May it be in your political structures, may it be in your so-called women leadership or governing structures on their own, right? Or may it be in the commercial market, the academic setup. The reality of the matter is that women today are still not equal to men, right? And I'm not just saying equality in the sense that, okay, so what men do, we want to do, right? There's a reality of the matter that we're saying that we want to be recognized for who we are and our contribution within society, right? As much as men are doing their part. And that means that the recognition that I own my body and I get to decide, right, in terms of uh, uh, what I would want to do with that particular body, and also that body no longer being a subject of men, because men used to decide for us for a very long time in terms of what our bodies represent and so on and so forth. So now, when you bring in the mkwebana and the madonsela, right, matter, and the reality of the matter is that they are merely warm bodies, right, that are occupying positions. And the reality also of the matter is that they have been used as a evening ground or leveling ground, participatory setup in terms of representational I don't know what would be the right way to put it, but basically, like, also women can also participate in these spaces, right? So we have an incorporated government that is exclusive, and these are the women that we have, right? They have the skills, they have the capacity, but then time and time again, we see that these very bodies are used by men to drive a particular agenda at different times. So Zuma, at his time, right? One person could say that, well, he was after Umadonsela, right? And all of us know that it's a no-brainer that the reason for that was because Umadonsela represented something very different from what Zuma wanted to drive for. And as a result, she kept being an obstruction for some time. But then you have your Mkhwebana, right? To Ramaphosa, Mkhwebana is exactly the very same, you could call symbol, right? In the sense that she is there to keep tabs on Ram, right? Or on Ramaphosa. And the difference between the two women is that Tulima Donsela has a backing of your Afrikaner capital setup that is able to defend her and that she's able to use to drive her own interests. Well, I would not even say her own interests. I would say that she's merely just an object there as well, being used by people who are able to identify skill and they're able to use it for their own benefit, right, to cover them. So the difference between Mkhwebana and your Tulima Donsela is just that she does not necessarily have an Afrikaner clan, right, in terms of power politics, right? Which the Afrikaner, or you could say that your white minority group, right? It still very much so controls and rules our whole setup today.
But for somebody else in that argument that you're making, somebody else can either say Now you are removing yourself as a woman. You are removing the agency of these women leaders from them. You are making them as if they are not able people to make decisions on their own. How would you then challenge that? Because somebody would say, no, these people, they get involved into these things knowing very well, considering that International Women's Day Foundation wanted an equality in its essence, not an equality that is going to be sugar-coated or going to be covered. So how would you say a person do not have an agency in this process? Because you seem like you're saying they can't think, they can't do anything, they are just being forced into the positions that they are in.
Okay, so I had said before, I had clearly said that even though they are skilled and they have the qualifications, right, they are used as objects. Now, let's go back to your basically during the time that women had started organizing, right? In Sorry, Tando, are you? Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thanks. So what happened at that particular time, right? So in your 1940s, when women are organizing and demanding for the right to vote, the right to equality, the right for their human rights to be identified, right? At the center of that, they had identified and they had been aware that they were exploited beings. And as a result, they did understand the contradiction between capital, right, and what it relegates them to, which it makes them your economic animals or tools, right? So at the center of their core was that it is not enough that we get all of these rights without turning over, right, capitalism for a socialist society. And that's only then when our human rights will be identified, right? So at the core of their demands, they were able to understand that their demands did not mean anything if the system of rule and power remained capitalism, which relegated their humanhood and their womanhood. And as a result, that is why they were exploited. That is why, for example, they were unable to participate within the whole setup. And I want to bring it that to the Mkwebana and the Tulima Donzela setup as well, to say that they remain as tools given the fact that they still have the skills, they still have the qualifications. I know at some point, sorry, not Uvavi, Udalimpov, he had said that Umkwebane he had posed a question if she was an advocate or not, right? So she refuses to answer that question. And then he dispels that whole thing by saying that, well, he's not, and but by not answering that question, it therefore then means that she's not an advocate, right?
That is
So,
Madonsela.
yes. So I want to use the very same trick that was played by Vavi, even though he's fully aware that she is an advocate. These qualifications we have, these positions of power we occupy, if they are not at the basis or at the primary core, centered on an identification of power and rule and seeing to it that we are able, for example, to turn over the exploitative agenda of capitalism and imperialism, we then therefore just become people who are participants, right, in a system of exploitation that disregards our humanhood and our womanhood as well. Because the reality of the matter is that capitalism is not in any way on a process of recognizing us as equal opponents. And
I
also,
see.
that's not like the plan of capital as well, in terms of
So,
what capitalism is.
so basically, when you look at, for you, when you look at the International Women's Day, the issue of mere, I'm going to say mere based on your logic, on a mere celebrating the equity, economic, and even though I agree that there's a great deal of work that has been done for women, But you are saying that, and even if you are in women leadership, whatever, whether it's a political or corporate or whatever environment, as long as that environment seeks to promote the idea of a global system of capitalism, for you that women leadership remains not fully helpful, one would say, because these people who are in those positions, they are merely tools of that particular system. I just want clarity on that so that we can be able to distinguish between the system and the governance itself.
So I would want to say this, right? So we want representation. That's important, right? I do understand that there are contradictions in every single thing that we interact with. So as much as women are stepping into spaces of power, we constantly have to ask ourselves a question of us being represented in these spaces, right? How does that transform our lives? And also, how does that put into practice the development and also the regard of the human status of women, right? Now, if, for example, you are saying that you're putting women into power so that you can be able to have representational politics, the reality of the matter is that it does nothing for us. That's the honest truth. But if we are saying that we are organizing and strategically identifying positions that we know can be able to capacitate women, can transform the livelihoods of women, and it can also, for example, challenge systems that do not want to recognize or affirm the human status of women, then at least there we are moving somewhere. So, for example, many people would say that, well, for 100 years, women have been fighting, or for 100 or more years, women have been fighting for their rights for recognition. And now, for example, they are able to participate in parliamentary politics, in your strategic positions in terms of your commercial, like, market setup, your policy building uh, structures, right? As much as that is there, the reality of the matter is that if we are not organizing as women towards identifying a system which contradicts our very being, then it means that we are misfocused in terms of how we are organizing and what we are organizing for.
Wouldn't you say that you are actually oppressing yourselves? Like we do as men who would want to promote, no, indoda funeka iyosebenza izokondla abantwana bayo nefamily yayo. But in the process of wanting to feed, but you are also oppressing yourself. So basically, one would say that is what is happening.
Well, we all begin from a premise of contradiction, right?
Okay.
We begin from the premise in which we find ourselves in, and then we are able to acquire the tools that are able to capacitate us to move towards a position where we know that when we organize and when we're fighting, what are we rallying
Okay.
women and fellow men towards, right? And how is that of benefit to women and also to mankind in general? So, for example, many people exclude, right, the struggles. They exclude themselves from the struggles of women by simply just merely thinking that, okay, so these struggles only affect women, and therefore this is a women issue, right?
Like gender-based
They are
violence.
unable to identify that what do women represent within our society, right? And also our interaction with them, till how far does that go? So, for example, you find that women are the most exploited. That's the reality of the matter, right? With your children and people with disabilities. That's the reality, right? And now, if you are saying that you are fighting against exploitation and you exclude the struggles of women, who are you fighting for and what are you fighting for? Right?
I see.
Yeah. And also, when did we begin to identify the humanity of any person on the basis of their gender, for example, that they decide to practice, right? Or the gender that they hold, or the sexuality that they decide to practice, right? And these are the contradictions that we have to deal with on a daily basis when we are trying to organize society towards identifying the crisis that we are in as mankind. And the fact that if you are denying women the status of them being able to be human beings, fully able, right, to make decisions for themselves, then you are disregarding the reality we have in a society that is
And
women headed, strongly so in our context.
yeah, no,
And
I hear that. I wanted to then bring in the issue of South Africa had a a reshuffling a few days ago, and earlier I was talking about Lindwe Sisulu, saying that a year or two ago she penned an opinion piece criticizing the the approaches of the post 1994 democracy, and then also there was the issue of Palapala, and also the fact that she was. I made an argument to say she's also in the faction of the CR22 or CR23 or CR17, and then there was the minister of Kokta, who is Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who seemed to have been demoted in some way to the presidency. And then I'm asking you these questions around the issue of the women that you find in cabinet and the women that you find that are being removed in the cabinet. Would you want to take us through from your ideas around the issue of the South African reshuffling with specific reference to these elements that I spoke about?
well, let me say before I get into that, that it is shaming, right, to have a female who's more than 60 something years old, now a minister of youth, right? When youth is within the ages of your 18 to 35, right? Or 16 to 35. That is shaming on its own. Now, let's first deal with the nature of the issue, right? Lindiwe Sisulu and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, they are political figures who belong to a particular political party. And within that particular political party, there are constant power wars, right? As they are in any other political parties, right? So what happens is that when one decides to support one factional camp and another decides to support another factional camp, the reality is the reality of the matter is that whatever factional camp rises above, right, and takes power, it will relegate and it will put to practice a particular norm or way of being. So it does make sense for Ramaphosa, for example, to reshuffle so that firstly he is able to see to it that he is in a place of safety and he's in a place of control. It makes sense to him in terms of his power and also understanding that these are politics, right? So when, for instance, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is moved from a more strategic position, right, that holds more power, and he's moved to a position that does very little and has very little significance in terms of power politics of recognition, right? The reality of the matter is that firstly, it begins at the level that it's politics at play. That also happens for Sisulu as well. It's politics at play. But also, what happens? We go back to the matter that we have spoken about earlier on, that if we are more interested in occupying positions of power, and that's where it ends, we are unable to establish and organize, right, for power that is able to at least change our livelihoods and transform our livelihoods as women. There's very little progress that takes place for women in general. I could also ask and say that I'll take a position, for example, of Enji Mutser, right? She has been the Minister of Education for some time now. Now, but she still, for example, is a minister in a position where girl children today still sometimes do not have sanitary pads, right? And as a result, sometimes they miss school and they are unable to participate as they should. Then the next question becomes, when we occupy these positions of power, how do they transform the livelihoods of women? If women are occupying these positions and very little happens in terms of transformation for women, right? And also, what will Nkosazana Dlamini do for the youth, right? She's an adult who's 65 years old.
She's
What will she
74.
start? Is she 74? Or at least I decreased. I at least tried to help her move towards the age bracket,
The
right?
youth
Of
bracket.
yeah. But then also these positions sometimes are not necessarily set to transform our lives, right?
Yeah.
What we find is that not just particularly on the issue of women, what we find is that these are cadres who deploy each other on the basis of recognition and power within the organization. And on the question of skill, on the question of capacity, on the question of has a person been able to show you that they are able and capacitated to be able to take on such a task, that
So
has
it's
not happened.
it's basically affect you. You also can think around the issue of the factional politics of the governing organization.
Yeah.
That could also be the case. But I found somebody else was saying that she finds it, especially with the issue of Sislindi Sisulu, that she was not replaced because of her factionalism. What would you say to that, performance-wise?
Well, I do
Do you
think
think
that
she has?
part of oh sorry, I think that part of her not coming back, right? One part of it is because it's a factional battle. That's the first part of it. So she was not strategic enough to be able to calculate that Ramaphosa has the power to come back. As a result, after all of the work that she has done to disregard him, which is valid enough, the reality of the matter is that the person who now has power is the very person that they're not necessarily in good terms with. So
In
that's
good
one
terms
component.
politically?
Yeah. Yes. So that's the first part in terms of why she's not in power. But secondly, this is a problem in terms of women organization. If we were to ask, as much as I don't necessarily know that much in terms of your women's league, right, within the ANC, I very much so know that women are not organized to be a formidable force there to honestly deal with the issues that they grapple with on a daily basis and provide solutions.
So
But instead, what
even
happens
if
is
the
that
women, I'm sorry to disturb you. So you're saying even if the women were to be removed haphazardly for factional battles, the women in the organization were not going to stand together and say no, akahambi lo.
no, so for example, Ubatabile, right? She has been known where, like, to, she has quite a following in terms of your women's league, right? So whenever anything happens that is not necessarily in her interests, she gathers the women, like women from the organization together to fight her battles, right? And women are not organizing to fight their own battles. And I think that sometimes we don't recognize the
I
power we have,
see.
but also political consciousness on its own plays a role in terms of how we organize ourselves as women.
I
So, for
see.
example,
Okay.
if we were saying that Ubatabile Dlamini is using the power that she has within the Women's League, right, to bring about transformation or to drive for transformational policies and action, right, within the African National Congress, it would have been better. But the reality of the matter is that that is not the case. How we organize women politics are relegated to Stockfells, right? And we're not necessarily dealing with the fact that women could be organizing. And they are women who are organizing, right? But then those organizations are not necessarily getting enough funding or yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to before we move so much into the ANC aspect of that, but some people have claimed your party as well, that it has got an almost 99% male leadership. Now, for one to have a person who comes here and wants to say that the women in the ANC are not organizing, when actually your own party with which you belong to is itself a boys' choir of some sort. Over 99% of the people in that executive are probably men, if not 98%. So why would you want to throw a stone at another place when you don't want to throw a stone within your own movement? If somebody raises that with you, how would you navigate that? Because it is within the women leadership in political environments.
So why am I throwing a stone whilst I live in a glass house?
Yes.
But the reality of the matter is that we live in a patriarchal society, right? We cannot dispute that. That's the reality. These are facts, and that's reality. Our organizations exist within those very contradictions. But what I can say in terms of the PAC, right, is that there are women that are fighting not merely for recognition within the party, to either, for example, participate in this faction or the other, though we still do have moments of that nature where women are used, right, to drive or a particular agenda that benefits men, right? And not just any men, but men who are a contradiction in terms of the policies of the organization, right? And also the work where women are recognized, right? So what I can say is that even within that context, there are women who are battling and trying by all means to organize women, not only for us to be recognized in these spaces, but for us to be able to primarily understand why is it that we are exploited as women, and also how then do we organize ourselves, not against the question of gender alone, but also the question of the mere base of exploitation, right? We are African women who are exploited by capitalism and imperialism. So when we talk about our gender and our struggles, right, within society as African women, we must be able to understand that capitalism plays a huge factor, and also imperialism as well. Colonialism also does. Also, your cultural politics that are not transformed, right, also do play a part in terms of our oppression. And then when we talk about organizing and transformation and the development of women, we look at those the pillars that I spoke about just now, and we are trying by all means to organize and also have a institution that is able to recognize women first. Two, to also understand and be aware that the struggles of women are also human or mankind struggles, if you could call it that. And they also deserve to be recognized as part of the struggle for liberation of the African people. So as much as we are within the contradiction, we are trying by all means to organize ourselves to defeat, right, that very contradiction on its own.
So the system itself is suffocating the very same people who are in it, because it's not only the units of the system, but the entirety of the system that suffocate women. There's a national shutdown that is coming on the 20th of March in South Africa, and I've seen various organizations putting various demands. I know for sure that was that shutdown was organized by the EFF. One of the demands of the EFF, I saw that there was a resignation of Ramaphosa and load shedding. But then there are other organizations who've got their own demands. I know a labor movement, SAFTU, they've got their own demands, which are different to these ones. So, what is your view on the national shutdown on the 30th of 20th of March, a day before the Human Rights Day, or Africanists call it the Sharpeville massacre? What is your view on that national shutdown?
So, okay, so my first take, right, before I get into the national shutdown matter, I think that the ways in which we organize sometimes, we seem as if we're a people that, people, that there's a mental disorder where there is, so is it schizophrenia, right? Where you take on different personalities at different times, right? So I do think that we are very, 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 when we are organizing, we are very schizophrenic in terms of how we organize. And I don't mean that, for example, in a way where I disregard the illness. I mean that in the sense that we are angry about like for instance, the nature of existence of the African people, the state in which we are in right now, right? But also in being angry, the tools we use do not necessarily deal with the issues that we want, or that could be able to transform our livelihoods, right? So, for example, we could say the very same thing, that there was an action that was taken not so long ago, right? Where organizations partnered together, took to the streets, and they demanded for Zuma to step down. Zuma resigns, and then there's a Ramaphosa who comes into his place. So we are interested in politics of personalities, and not politics that are concrete, and that would be able to deal with the contradiction of, okay, so what can be able to help the African people, right, towards living lives that are affirmative to them, right, that are not human degrading, that are not exploitational, that are able to identify the individual spiritual, material interests, right, of that particular person, right, or that being, in terms of a human being who exists. So, for example, the fact that I need to be able to eat, right? To be able to be a human being that exists, right? So we are constantly interested in politics of the personal, in the sense of the person, right? That is what we are interested in. And those politics do not necessarily do much of a difference.
I
So, for
see.
example, when you are demanding for to end load shedding, we need to be able to understand that ESCOM, right, is not incapable of providing the right quality of energy in the sense of electricity, right, to our people. Now, ESCOM has been put in a position of crisis deliberately, right? For a reason that is intended towards privatizing the institution, not for the interests of the African poor majority, but for the interests of the minority group that continues to own the majority of the resources of the African people. That is why, for example, Ramaphosa can be able to say to us, when there has been an 18% hike, that his hands are tied. And then
I
also
see.
the mineral and energy institution, right? It is also, like, for instance, its response to the raise is that, oh, well, our hands are also tied. Nothing else can be done in this particular instance. But if you guys want to continue having electricity, what
You
then
must
can happen
pay.
is that you must pay, right? But what do we pay with? We don't have money to pay, right? So what do we pay with? We are exploited beings who are not paid enough even within the jobs that we work in, right? But then
But
you want us to pay for the hike that will benefit individuals in a particular area, group of privilege.
But the people who are saying that Ramaphosa must resign, they are saying before Ramaphosa there was no load shedding. It fell off under the Zuma administration. Now the reality is that the majority of people are suffering with load shedding. So we don't want load shedding because Ramaphosa brought it back. That's why they are saying he must resign because somebody else might end it. And when I are saying by going to a national shutdown, those are politics of personalities. Just explain that a little bit in so that it does make sense. Because abanye abantu bathi kuRamaphosa ingxaki because he's the one who wants to privatize this process.
Well, he's also a problem in the sense that he forms, like, for instance, he is also a being that allows a particular privileged, like, for instance, group, right, to continue exploiting the African people. So he is also a problem, but the problem will not end with him. The suffering and the exploitation of the African people will not end with him. And
So
also,
what would you suggest in relation to that now, a national shutdown? What can happen? What must then can happen?
so my problem with these shutdowns is that, hence I go back to the schizophrenic manner in which we organize, right? People will feel that they are doing something for an amount of time. Because they went out into the streets for one day, we will feel as if we have confronted the issue or the matter at hand. We go back home, our lives remain as normal as they are, right? We are tired out with this whole time. We will then organize ourselves again another day. We will go for one day, we'll take to the streets, and that's what it will be. That is what it will be. Now, the reality of the matter is that the state in which African people currently find themselves in, it is appalling and it is a problem that we identify. But then how do we organize ourselves as Africans towards, right, a transformation of the concrete material conditions in which we live, right? So, for instance, where we know that we will not be paying for electricity, because it is also stated that electricity is a basic human need. Now, for people who are poor, who are unable to afford the rates which are currently being put out, which will continue to raise. That's the reality. Rise. Sorry, that's that's the reality of the matter. They will not be able to access electricity. As a result, they will have been deprived of a basic human need and necessity, right? Now, ESCOM on its own, it does not begin with Ramaphosa. This thing of it began with Ramaphosa is also misleading. During the time of Thabo Mbeki, there were consultative meetings, right, of political parties, the opposition parties, and also the ANC as well, where in Parliament they were being briefed on the crisis or the energy crisis which we are heading towards. The fact that we have so many power stations, right, that power the country, and also the question of capacity for those particular power stations. And Thabo Mbeki had answered and said that it was too expensive to build at that particular time. As a result, let us try for other means of managing, right, the electricity crisis.
So
So
basically,
it has.
the problem is not now. The problem is not only starting now, but the problem has been there since. That's what you are saying.
Yes, since then, but also in terms of, like, for instance, we have failed in terms of identifying how the problem could be fixed by ESCOM as a state of the entity, right? Where, for instance, energy is generated by the state. We no longer have municipalities that sell power, right, to your residents or your citizens, if you could say. And then they are able to provide electricity for people here in the country for free. But then we could also sell energy outside of the country, and that's how you are able to make profit. But also, ESCOM has been saved time and time again with our tax money, right? And that money could have been used to build reliable energy stations, right? Outside what Ozuma had built, which today are non-functional, right? And even though money has been spent towards building these stations, right? But now we find out that no, this station is not working, it's shut down. As a result, we are unable, for instance, to generate enough electricity for everyone to be able to use, right? As much as I'm not an engineer, and as much as, for example, I would not be able to give you tabs in terms of how many watts are able to power how many so people, right? But one thing that I can be able to say is that there has been a deliberate action to say that the state cannot find the solution to the problem of ESCOM.
I see.
Therefore, the problems of ESCOM must be fixed by a private entity which will control energy, right? And it will decide when we get electricity, how we get electricity, how
I
much we
see.
pay for that particular electricity. And that's where the problem is at.
So if you were to be a a minister of youth and women and people with disabilities, as we are going to the conclusion, what would be your approach in that particular ministry? I'm going to ask you one question specifically on all these elements that we spoke about. If you were to be a minister of youth, women, and people with disabilities, these are focusing on three aspects. The youth are the majority of the society, the women are the majority in relation to men, and then the people of disabilities are people of a minority. If it was you, a minister, what would you, at face value, some of the things that you would achieve? Or, I
So
mean, you would
before,
do?
okay, so before answering your question, I'll just say, well, in that like with just the three components that you have given me, right? Uh, I would organize society towards rebelling against the state of being, if we're putting it out there,
But you're a minister.
towards an establishment of a socialist society, right? Where policy development or policy on its own, right, embodies these particular factors. But I, I won't necessarily say that, right? What I would say in terms of organizing youth, women, and people with disabilities is that we have to be able to understand what is the matter, what are the problems of the youth, right? Part of those problems are employment in terms of the youth. Part of those problems are an education or good quality education, right? Part of those problems are accessibility to spaces of learning. Part of those problems are your recreational activities in terms of young people who are able to participate in your recreational activities, your sport, your debating clubs, your there are different recreational activities, right? Then we go to women in terms of the crises there, right, or the crisis there. In terms of women, you'll find that very much so we do not have like access to spaces, to the market. That's one thing. We don't have jobs, right? That's also another crisis that we have. We also, for example, do not have good healthcare systems, right? When we talk women and women are giving birth, right, in hospitals, we still find that today there are hospitals where women give birth on their own, right? Because the facilities do not either have enough beds or
I
enough
see.
staff, or the staff is working under pressure, and also they are not enough in that particular space. The facilities on their own are not necessarily well maintained, right? Even in terms of hygiene, in terms of the facility itself, right? The question of medication on its own. So there's a study that we have been like not doing, right? But there is a process of like getting your PrEP vaccination and that all set up, right?
I see.
So there has been research that is being done in terms of accessibility for women to get PrEP, right? As a preventative for HIV, right? That's what PrEP is. Now, that also plays into lowering the levels of HIV infections and also managing that. But you would find that today, the procedure, right? The reason why, even at a research level, it is hard to do it is because for one particular person to be in a study at least for like 13 months or for 18 months, it would cost that one human being 18,000 Rand, right? Now, quickly just tell me which women will afford just for a PrEP vaccine that much money, right?
So
And
it is
because,
costly itself, even though it has got
yes,
a greater benefit in the society, but it is costly itself.
yeah, so the research can't happen because it's costly. That's the first part of it,
I see.
right? Two, we are not going to be able, for example, to have people have access to medicine, right? At a larger rate, and also without paying.
I see.
Right? Because also the medicine is very expensive to make, and because it is too expensive to make, who are you making it for?
I
And
see.
pharmaceutical companies want their money as well, as much as you are researching and doing what you are doing.
No, I
So that
see.
was a point just to make, just to say that even in terms of healthcare, medicines are very expensive, right? And also women do not have access to these medicines, right? And also in terms of facilities that are able to teach women and equip women with the right skills, first to affirm their livelihoods, because these are human beings. And we don't need to be anything else outside ourselves to be able to
I
exist within
see.
the society. The
I
constant
see.
need for us at these schools, for us to become more like men, right? To be able to occupy spaces of power. Like, for instance, when they look at a CEO, it needs to be a person that has the qualities
Right.
that
Must be
men do.
strong, independent, and
Yeah, yeah. And the emotional element of it, right? You should not be emotional beings.
I
You
see.
forget that humans are emotional beings in
I
their very
see.
nature, not just men. And men have had to subdue their emotional intelligence to be able to subscribe to a thing, for instance, that is created or for them as to what a man should be. So,
But
so the ministry, and I'll also say that people with disabilities, may it be males, may it be females, they also face the very same matters, right? In terms of there's even a harder, right, a process to be able to allow them to access spaces, any form of
spaces here,
facility, right? Because, for
even
example,
employment,
yes, right? Because
even
also,
training, education.
and also even facilities that are able to, yes, like for instance, a person who has a disability at a very young age. I'll make an example. There is autism, right? uh, Autism, people with autism are incredible in terms of how they think, right? uh, and if your child, for example, you realize, maybe at there are limited facilities to be able to get your child to, at least for instance, train them in terms of like and to train you as a parent as well in terms of how do you deal with a
How to
child that
deal
is
with them?
autistic. Yeah, when are you able to identify that, for instance, the various processes of autism are taking place, right? Uh, this is but one illness that I'm speaking about, right? Or disability, let me put it like that, that I'm trying to relay. And what you find is that because you have not been able to identify the particular disability at a young age, it becomes harder to now deal with it at an, like for instance, at a later stage, right? And also because of a lack of facilities that are able to deal with various disabilities, yabona, that children or adults might have, you'll find that they won't be able to be compatible within our
I see.
society in the long run, right? So, for
Because
example, a
they
person,
were. they did not have the correct channeling.
Yes. Now, this is a person capable of participating within our society, strongly so, but because they have not had access to these spaces for such a time, they are unable to at a later stage due to the fact that
I
they
see.
are not conditioned, for example, to deal with our society, right? And how, for instance, to also learn to control themselves in a way that they will be able to deal with this stage that we
With
find ourselves
this,
in. So,
yeah.
so what I'm trying to say, that's an example of also showing that there's a lack of accessibility to spaces of disability, right? For different disabilities, they need, for instance, spaces that speak to that particular illness that we are talking about.
But you said, most capitalism doesn't care. Capitalism wants people that it is going to exploit. Mhlambi those people, it
Exactly.
feels like it is not going to be able to draw so much blood from it. Let me ask you a last question, and I want you to be a little bit shorter in it. If you were to advise the various political parties that are going to be, others are supporting the shutdown, others have initiated the shutdown, in relation to what you have already said about the shutdown being a schizophrenic process or a schizophrenic action, what would you advise the political parties that are, others are supporting it, others have initiated it, others are whatever they say, but what would be your advice on how to ensure that the national shutdown is effective, if it could be effective? But I heard that from you it is not, because, yeah, what would
Well,
you
I
say?
think that our people, the first thing that we should be honest about is that we should not hold our breath. Uh, we like in terms of the primary contradictions won't change as of yet, and the shutdown won't change that. But people learn in practice, right? And people get exposed, right? In practice as well, right? So they people must participate if they feel that this is a matter that is important to them, but they must be able to understand that not much will change. I would even say that Ramaphosa will not necessarily vacate the seat he's sitting
He
on,
will he
right?
will, he will resign for other reasons,
Not because
if he
people do
will.
not have power,
I
right?
see.
But because we are not yet organizing in the manner in which we should be organizing for. So,
I
for
see.
example, the masses should be organizing for power, right? To take power for themselves so that they are able to drive their own interests in terms of how should the market look like, right? How should production in this setup look like for your benefit? How should the schooling system look like for your benefit? So, what I'm saying in plain is that people must go if they feel the need or the urge to go. But the reality of the matter is that nothing will change as of now until we start organizing in a different manner that is more sustainable and that will bring about concrete results for us.
People must start organizing in a more sustainable manner that will bring concrete results for us all as the masses of the people. That is the final words of our guest, Zandiswa Kula, who was giving us her views on various issues. Thank you very much, Zandiswa, for being part and parcel of the conversation. Siyabulela kakhulu. You gave us something to think about, even though we got to get into the conversation a little bit late, but siyabulela kakhulu. Any parting shot that you would like to say to the viewers, to anybody else who cares to listen to Bonte Politique at this moment?
Okay, so thank you, Tando, right, for the opportunity, firstly. I think that the work you guys are doing at Ponte de Politique is important. The work of simplifying politics, right? Because these are quite intense ideas, but these ideas need to be simplified. So thank you for that opportunity. And also thank you to people that are watching as well. I think that these are matters that we are battling through as well and trying to come up with solutions too, right? As we exist in a society that is full of contradictions. I think that it is very important that we understand the significance of organizing. And also, for example, how do we occupy spaces of power as women deliberately, right, to bring about concrete change, right, to the state in which we are currently living in. So I do celebrate women who have been organizing, who have not gotten enough recognition for the work that they are doing, women that have understood that it is very important to deal with systems of power. And also, these are components that also obstruct us from being able to be the human beings that we are, or being granted a human status, or granting to ourselves, others would say, a human status that we are so deserving of. So thank you, Tando, so much to you. Thank you to people who are watching today, and salute to women who are organizing, because there are women who are incredible and organizing out there. And also to men as well who have understood, right, the work that we are doing, of saying that we are all in this together, right? If one of us is in a position of disadvantage and exploitation, we all are, even though men are exploited beings as well, just like us.
No, thank you
Yeah.
very much. Siyabulela kakhulu, and all the best, and all the best for the week, and thank you very much. As you have heard, colleagues and friends, those who are watching with us, our guests putting across some of her ideas that she thought are very critical and important. I hope that you have picked up something that is of interest, and we thank you for joining us. Those who are watching on Twitter, those who are watching on Facebook, those who are watching on YouTube, all the best. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow and like us. On the Politic, we'll see you next week, Sunday at 6 o'clock, same time. All the best.